Alright, so hey everyone. Today I want to take another look at the Gamesir Nexus app options. I've made a previous couple videos covering a bug that had the curve options affecting the Antideadzone value, and that was corrected, at least for the G7 Pro. I've been made aware that other controllers still have this issue. I've recently picked up a G7HE controller, and that has that issue, and I'll be demonstrating that in just a bit. Currently, we have the G7 Pro right here, and if we go to the sticks and the right stick, we'll start with the circle mode, and if we apply an anti-deadzone, and let's try to move it pretty horizontally, we can see that this is giving us 40% as our starting point. So that is working correctly. And if we apply a curve, by default this exponential curve is linear, but if we slow it down, nothing happens. If we speed it up, well, technically it does change slightly, but that's because there is some very slight lean on the controller, so it is a little further on the curve, but the starting point is still 40%. And at the lowest value, that's much more easily expressed. It is not being slower than the 40% starting point. The curve should start at your, or the output curve anyway, should start at your initial anti-deadzone and then stop at your maximum anti-deadzone. So this is what the corrected version looks like. And if we go and switch to the Gamesir HE, this flickering is from, whoops, let's actually, the sticks both register when they're both connected to the app, so that's a mistake on my part. So if you saw any flickering, that's from the controllers fighting with each other. That's not a general issue. But if we did the same thing, set this to 40%, and let's try to get a pretty horizontal lean going. So we have the same offset, so that is perfectly fine by default with a linear curve. However, with an exponential curve, you can see that it dropped extremely low, and this is at 11 and 3%, since it's a little difficult to see. And this shouldn't happen. It should stay at 40% because that's our start point. This was the issue I brought up and was corrected, but apparently only applies to the G7 Pro. And it should apply to this entire app. I don't know if the other controllers that use this app are affected. I think there's the SE and then whatever the base G7 model is. I understand different firmwares for specific connectivity issues and all that, but as far as once you convert the stick values to -1 to 1 or whatever range you're using, the math should be identical. So the values here should be the same regardless of the controller. And I don't know why they're different, but they should be made the same because this makes it so that the G7 Pro has correct options. You set the dead zone you want and the curve you want, or anti-deadzone specifically, and you have it. But with the HE, you have to dance around the curve, making your values completely incorrect. So this is the super low value. So by default, if we move this back to 50%, where it's a linear curve, we have the correct anti-deadzone size. If we max this out, it's way smaller than it should. And if we increase it fully, it's way faster than it should. If you remember the G7 Pro example, it was a little faster because my stick was a little further than the 0% mark. So it was just past, was about 45%, but now we see this has jumped to 75%, so it's just not even close to accurate if you're using a curve. If you're not using a curve, it is generally accurate, but that is an issue that needs to be corrected. Another thing that, actually we'll just go back to the Pro just because the stick values are a little more clear with it. There has been a bit of a change between the circle and raw mode, or specifically the raw mode. So in my previous comparison, I would move the stick to about 50%, and the raw mode was about 10% faster than the circle mode, but now that flickering is from the HE interfering. But if I trigger the raw mode, it increased about 2%. However, previously it'd be 55%, so 10% larger. And we can see that this 2% kind of extends across the entire range. And what's a little more interesting is that the circle mode actually appears a little more sensitive than the raw mode, whereas the raw mode used to be consistently 10% faster. Now it seems like the raw mode is in the, that's the HE messing with stuff. Now you can see that they're very slightly different. So I don't understand how they've rescaled things to have this occur. In my previous test, I also demonstrated that 10% increase with the max Antideadzone. And if we set it here, we'd have 80% as it should be with the circle mode. But if we switch it to raw, it goes up to 88%. So raw is 10% faster in this case. So that's the case, what happened previously. And if we bump this up to 40%, we can see that that's correct in circle, and it's 10% faster with raw. So it's kind of strange. I think maybe just the calculations are a little different for whatever reason. I don't know how this changes things specifically. So, but I just wanted to point out that difference because in my previous coverage, it was just reliably 10% larger. And here it is reliably 10% larger for the anti-deadzone values, but without the anti-deadzone values, they're pretty close to the same, and with raw actually being a hair slower. So there used to be arguments about raw being more sensitive, and some players like that, but now it seems negligible. I don't have more to say on it. This is just me kind of rambling, but that is different, and some of my previous videos are outdated now. But that has been a lot of rambling, and the short of it is Gamesir should make it so that all the controllers that use this app should have the same options. The options should perform correctly and ideally, because currently the G7 Pro is set up correctly, and I don't know if the specific Pro variants like the Aim Labs and the Zenless controllers have their own specific implementation. I think it's kind of interesting that it knows what color controller you're using, but all the controllers that are on the app should have the options affect them in the exact same way. And that's about it. So thanks for watching, and everyone, have a great rest of your day.